Hello, this is Dr. Williams giving you a short tutorial on how to use quotations effectively. So we're looking at how you might assemble a wealth of evidence and how you might integrate that seamlessly in your writing without it sounding clunky. So what I'm going to do is take you through the process of assembling your evidence, of fine-tuning it so that it fits really well in how you write, and then some quick kind of do's and don'ts of how to integrate it into your own writing. So firstly, how do you get a wealth of evidence? You need to assemble all of your quotes. So for example, if I was interested in the theme of criminality and accusations, I might assemble this little bank of quotes while I was jotting down my plan. So all I've done here is type into the internet Othello quotes thief, Othello quotes rob, Othello quotes steal, and that's how I've assembled my evidence today. If you are in an exam or if you are in the classroom, you might have color coded it. So you might have annotated your extract, or you might have already color coded this in your copy of the play, and you might already have that kind of imagery threaded through where you can just go through and quickly copy out anything that links to this particular theme. So I've got down with him thief from Iago in 1.2. I've got O foul thief, where hast thou stole my daughter from Brabantio in the same scene. In the next scene, I've got the Duke saying, the rob that smiles steals something from the thief. Then from Cassio in Act 2, all that men should put an enemy in their mouths to steal away their brains. He's talking about drink there. And finally, this from Iago in 3.3, that climactic scene. Who steals my purse steals trash, but he that filches from me my good name robs me of that which not enriches him. So what I'm doing is assembling a line of argument here. So I'm looking at all those quotes. What do they have in common? And this is my line of argument. The men in the play seem obsessed with possession through the repeated allusions to theft. So all of these quotes are about thievery, and what I'm saying is they all come from men, and it makes the men seem obsessed with who owns what and who possesses whom. Once you've assembled your evidence then, your next step is to cherry pick the best bits, because there's no way I can get all of those quotes into an essay and make it sound concise and get my point across really well if I'm just copying out quote after quote after quote. That's not what the examiner wants to see from me. They want to know that I can pick the very best evidence. So one way of doing this might be to find a semantic field. So here's my evidence again, but in red I've color-coded a semantic field of thievery. So I've got the words thief, robbed, steal, filch, robs. So here again in grey is my topic sentence, my argument, that the men seem obsessed with possession. And then this is how I would drop my quotes in, cherry pick them and integrate them so that I'm combining a wealth of evidence and just throwing at the examiner the best examples to back up my point. So Shakespeare weaves a semantic field of theft from Iago and Brabantio's early accusations that Othello is a thief, to the Duke's recognition that Brabantio feels robbed, spreading even to discussions of stolen reputation from Cassio and Iago. So not only am I looking at particular words that are important, I'm tracing my quotes here with thief and robbed, but I'm also talking about how that changes in context. I'm talking about how here it's to do with casting Othello as a criminal outsider, maybe casting Desdemona as an object to be won, and then I'm moving on to this idea of reputation and how that kind of feeds into the bigger ideas of the play. So one way then of cherry picking your evidence is to look for linguistic patterns on a kind of word level and grouping them all together. Another option when you come to cherry pick might be to find a common theme that links a few of your quotes so that you can choose which ones to use and which ones to disregard. So here in the kind of darker blue colour, I've assembled three that to me are all on the same theme. So again, if I'm talking about the men being obsessed with possessing things because of this, semantic field of theft, what these three seem to have in common is that they're not worried about possessions, they're actually worried about losing, women and owning Desdemona in this context. So I've said, it's really possessions that they worry about losing. For instance, when Iago encourages Brabantio to view Othello as a thief, this implies that his property has been stolen. This idea is later reinforced by the Duke, who speaks of the rob that smiles stealing something from the thief. So I've chosen this word thief from these first two, and then I've used my full quote here, because this one's got two words in. So I can really combine these quickly and then talk about these two words in my second quote. So even the most sympathetic and level-headed male characters view Desdemona as an object to be awarded to the most deserving, and I could zoom in then on that idea of robbed and thief. A third and final way that you might cherry-pick your evidence once you've assembled it is simply find the best quote. And by that I mean the one you can get the most mileage out of. So which one is going to give you the most material, which one is going to best illuminate your point and give you lots to write about. If you've bothered to remember or find a quote, then really get bang for your buck out of that. Try and get as much mileage as possible. So out of everything in my kind of bank, if you will, this last one seems to me to be the best, because if I look at that semantic field of theft, it occurs in so many guises. So I've got the repetition of steals, but I've also got the verb filches, I've also got the verb robs, and it also connects to the kind of bigger ideas of the play on this idea of reputation and how maybe it's the things that you can't see that you need to be worried about, because that's how Iago operates. It's all about deception. So for all I've found a semantic field of theft, and I could indeed write that particular line before I talk about this quote might be the one that gives me the most mileage. So I would simply put a colon and put that quote, and then I would zoom in on as much of the quote as possible. Okay, so if I'm going to bother to write out something that long, I need to make sure I'm saying 2 or 3 things about it. So I copy out the quote after a colon, and I say, Iago uses a semantic field of theft, and then I give my evidence, steals, filches, robs, to plant the idea that Othello has been wronged, almost like an incantation. Indeed, these words echo his earlier accusations of witchcraft and thievery, adopted by Brabantio in Act 1. So not only am I talking about this quote, but I'm talking about when he's used those words previously, so I'm alluding to these ones. He contrasts material loss with abstract notions of good name to further destabilize Othello's trust in Desdemona and his demand for ocular proof. So I'm talking about the fact that Iago is talking about you can have things stolen from you without even knowing it, without even seeing it, and that it's to do with kind of pride and your reputation rather than kind of objects and material goods, which is how this all begins. It's all about, putting money in your purse and who belongs to whom. So the rule of thumb then basically is you must reduce any quote that you include. You can't just have a floating quotation. You must prepare the reader in some way. And there are kind of varying degrees of success modelled here. So it's best to avoid this top example. Othello says that he have done the state some service. Yes, that is a quote. Yes, he might reduced it, but grammatically it doesn't quite match up. So a better way of phrasing that would be to slightly reword the introduction here using square brackets. So Othello says that he has done the state some service would be better. But the best way is to avoid using square brackets and basically adapt your words and your introduction so that you don't have to do that clunky revision. So Othello says that he has done the state some service. So just quote the bit that you can afford to quote in that it makes sense with the rest of your sentence. So basically there are 2 key ways, aren't there, of introducing a quote. The most easy, and the one that we've just looked at, is indicate who's speaking by using a noun like Othello and a verb. So you could say, when Iago, my noun, soliloquizes to the audience, he warns us, I am not all I am. So really think about that verb in terms of making your writing a little bit more engaging. So rather than when Iago comes on the stage, he says, Othello says this, Desdemona says this. In Act 2, Brabantio, it doesn't appear actually, in Act 2, Desdemona says. Try and think about what kind of meaning or tone you take away from that line. Part of the skill of reading a drama is understanding how it will be performed. So Iago's definitely warning us, as well as the kind of characters on the stage, that he is not what he is, not to trust him. The second, and I must admit my favourite, is to just use a colon. So here's an example. Othello is introduced as a criminal outsider, colon, and then I give the evidence that backs up that point. O thou foul thief, where hast thou stored my daughter? The rule of thumb with a colon, guys, is that what comes before and after it must be a complete sentence. So I could have written, Othello was introduced as a criminal outsider, full stop. And then this quote is a whole sentence, and that would make sense on its own. So those are 2 standalone sentences that I've joined with a colon. So make sure if you are going to go for this particular strategy that it makes grammatical sense. So some do's and don'ts then. This is the most frustrating thing as a marker, as a reader of essays. Don't waste time if you're in an exam, or words if you're writing coursework with a word count, with awkward introductions to quotes. So things like, an example of this is evident when, or a fellow shows us when he says, this can be seen when. You don't need that. If you look at that, that's literally one bit of punctuation compared to all these surplus words. This is so much more concise, so much more convincing, because we go straight from the point to the evidence and we don't have that clunky segue. The same goes for after the quote, guys. So try and avoid saying, once you put your quote in, Shakespeare's trying to point out that this example shows that this quote demonstrates how. You should be able to write an entire essay without using the word quote or using the word example. Just get straight to your point. What are you going to say about it? Another way of kind of avoiding that warbling on is to contextualize in a meaningful way. So rather than just saying, in Act 2, Othello says, "Oh, my fair warrior," that is true, but telling us that it happens in Act 2 means nothing. So you might want to try, upon their reunion in Cyprus, Othello greets his wife with the exclamation, "Oh, my fair warrior." It gives us a bit more context about what's happening in the plot, storyline, or what the relationship is at that point, or what the significance of that moment is. It's their reunion, they've been separated, he's delighted to see her. You could even contextualize in terms of tragedy and structure. So you might say at the very climax of the play, in the prologue, in the moment of the inciting incident, you could really use kind of structural terms here to contextualize rather than just in Act 2. The joy of square brackets, and I'm not even being ironic here, I do genuinely love them. If you can avoid them, great, but they are so useful, and they are useful for three things in particular. Firstly, to cut out unnecessary words. So here, Emilia wants Othello to beware of jealousy. The quote is, "Beware, my lord, of jealousy," but I don't need that bit because it doesn't prove my point, so I cut it out, I saved myself some time, I saved my poor hand in a 3-hour exam. The joy of square brackets also comes in your ability to clarify who's talking about whom or what they're, referring to. So here I've put in proper nouns just to make it clear who's talking and what they're saying and who it's about. So for Desdemona had eyes and chose Othello, whereas this is Othello saying, for she had eyes and chose me. So that means that I've put that kind of in my voice, in my words. That might be how I end an essay. The third and final joy of square brackets is that you can alter the grammar, and most often this will be tense, or it might be to do with kind of plurals and singulars, just to make your whole sentence make sense as a whole. So this is normally where you've introduced the quote with your own words, and then you need to make sure that the two ends kind of marry up. So Othello warns us that when he no longer loves Desdemona, chaos will come again. I've had to change the tense there because the original is chaos is come again, and I'm talking about the kind of future. So I've put that in the future tense. The better rule of thumb then, rather than splitting up a long quote with lots of ellipses, so if you've got a really good quote but it's got bits in that you know you're not going to talk about that you don't need to include, it's better to weave those into a sentence rather than copy it out and put in lots of ellipses. So an example would be, Othello finally considers himself one that loved not wisely but too well, admitting he was easily jealous but also wrought and perplexed in the extreme. So that's all taken from Othello's final soliloquy, and I could have just copied it out and put a load of square brackets with ellipses in, but I'm just mining it and presenting a lot of evidence that I think is useful and important. The final thing I want to say then is that you should only include a long quote if you intend to analyse it in detail. So I've included here the green section from our earlier slides where I copied out the best quote and I said a lot about it. Basically, the rules here are, if you are talking about a long quote where you've integrated it into a full sentence, make sure you show any line breaks with a forward slash. Make sure that you're replicating the capitals that come at the beginning of those lines. But if you are copying out more than 40 words generally, then put it on a separate line and make sure you indent it both ends. So it should be kind of slightly marked from the rest of your paragraph. So this is exactly what you've seen earlier in these slides where I talk about Robs and filches, but I've put in the entire quote here, I've indented it, and then I would have to go on and say more than I do currently about it because it is so long.